Hello and welcome to this evening's event with Mr. Michael Rosen. Mr. Rosen is a British children's author and poet who served as Children's Laureate from June 2007 to June 2009. He was awarded an exceptional award for the Best Children's Illustrated Book of its year in the 4 to 11 age range for Michael Rosen's Sad book. He has also been involved in campaigning, increased welfare, education, and the Palestinian cause. More recently, in March 2021, he has written about his experience with the NHS while suffering from COVID-19. The way in which this event will work is that we'll first hear from Michael for about 20 minutes, some excerpts from his book, Many Different Kinds of Love. Then we'll proceed into a moderated conversation with Michael and myself, and then we'll conclude with audience questions, which you can submit through the Q&A function on the Zoom. Please remember to put your name and college. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
Thanks very much, Adam. Thank you. And the book has a subtitle. It's called A Story of Life, Death and the NHS. And that's what it is. Spoiler alert, in case anyone wondered whether I died, I didn't. So I am alive. And I thought I'd begin with where I was day 12 into COVID. And this was on the 27th of March last year. And I wrote a tweet that said, "The year's seasons roll by in a night. Sweats, freezes, sweats, freezes. Wondered whose mouth I had. I didn't remember it as made of sandpaper. Water is as good as ever." And that was my last tweet because things got a bit more serious. And it went something like this. "Get tested," said my friend John. "The GP is closed. A recorded message at the surgery says to not come in and not to go to A&E. If you think you might have COVID-19, call 111, it says. I call 111. I get through to the ambulance service and talk to a man who asks me some questions. No, I'm not coughing, I say. No, I don't feel worse today than I felt yesterday. He tells me to keep taking the paracetamol and ibuprofen. In the spare room at home, I say to Emma, it feels like I can't get enough air. There isn't enough air. I can't catch up, I say. There are moments I feel hotter than I've ever felt before, and moments when I'm colder than ever before. I shudder as if I'm naked out of doors. We look at the instructions again. Don't call the GP, don't visit the GP, don't go to A&E, ring the ambulance service. I get through. He asks me if I'm feeling worse than yesterday. No. He asks me if I'm coughing. No. He says he thinks I'm fine. Keep taking the paracetamol and Nurofen. There isn't enough air. I can't catch up. The doorbell rings. Emma has asked our friend, a neighbour who's a GP, to visit. She gives Emma a contraption to check if I'm absorbing oxygen and waits outside on the doorstep. Emma hands it back to her. She calls out, "You have to go to A&E right now," she says. I can't really walk, I say. I get the shakes just going to the loo. "You have to go now," she says. "Bump downstairs on your bum," she says. "I'll ring them to tell them you're coming," she says. Emma drives me to A&E. I'm panting. It's night. The road is empty. The moment I go in, I'm surrounded with people in masks. They put an oxygen mask on my face. So that was Dr. Katie, who happens to be a GP, and not happens to be, but she's a neighbor and a friend and a GP. And with a combination of luck and my wife Emma's foresight, she came over, she put the contraption, it's called an oximeter, on my finger. And as the way she put it, Emma came down the stairs and said, "It's 58. At first I thought this must be a mistake, that maybe she had confused this with your pulse, which is also shown on the display. But when she told me that your pulse was 115, I knew there was no mistake. Oxygen saturations are given as a percentage, so have a maximum of 100. A normal level is at least 95%. I've never seen an oxygen saturation this low in someone conscious." So there we are. That was the state I was in when I went into hospital. And once I got in, I was given various possibilities as to what should happen. And one of them was a doctor is standing by my bed asking me if I would sign a piece of paper which would allow them to put me to sleep and pump air into my lungs. Will I wake up, I say? There's a 50-50 chance, he says. If I say no, I say, 0, he says. And I sign. And the rather strange thing about that is that when I kind of hear myself or read it or hear myself say that, I'm reminded that in actual fact, I've made it sound as if I've sort of resigned, but this may seem unbelievable. When he said 50-50, I thought, hey, that's not so bad, is it? 50-50. So, I mean, I could wake up. Now, I've tried to work out why I was kind of having that attitude, and I think it must be because I was short of oxygen. And people who've climbed Everest, of which most of you will have done, will know that when you go above a certain level and you're short of oxygen, I think people get a bit high. It's not meant to be a joke, actually, but anyway, you know what I mean, that you get a bit sort of way. So when he said 50-50, I genuinely thought that was really good. It's only now when I look at it and I see it on the page, it's in fact on the back of the book, I'm actually horrified. I actually feel, that really was touch and go, and that is the case. So then they put me into a coma. It's what's called officially an induced coma. And I was in that coma for a long time. I was in that coma for 40 days. And while I was in there, the nurses wrote a kind of diary of letters to me. I'll hold it up. I don't know whether you can see that. And as you can see, it's called a patient diary, or very patient diary, as I call it. And the nurses and the physios and the helpers who were coming into intensive care wards all over the country, so I'm not talking about something that was only happening to me, they wrote this diary after being on a shift maybe for 8 hours, sometimes just all through the night. And my ward, intensive care ward, was supposed to hold 11, so 11 bays, and it was up to 24 when I was in there. And the fatality rate in my ward was 42%. So 42% of us were dying from COVID. And I'll just read you one or two of the letters that come, and I find it quite difficult to read these because they are. It makes me so emotional just to see what they said. So here's Margie, who writes, on your second ICU admission, that's what they call the intensive care ward, you required a ventilator to take over your breathing due to your further deterioration. You required quite a lot of ventilator support. The ICU team had to prone you, meaning you had to lie on your belly to improve your oxygenation. The procedure required 7 people to reposition you carefully. So have you got the image of me with tubes up my nose, up my nose, and later I had I think already by then, a tracheostomy in here. That's still, you can still see the scar below my voice box. And they're turning me over and sort of presumably whipping out the tubes and sticking them back in again with 7 people. I'm quite a big bloke. I'm 6'2". So that seems a bit incredible. And then it says, take one day at a time. You'll get there soon. All the best, Michael. Margie. I might come back to Margie later. Here's now Kajal Doshi, who writes, I've been asking you to blink and squeeze my hand to communicate, and you've been diligently obliging. This is the 23rd of April. So I've been under now by this time for about 20 days. You're doing great. The doctors are keeping an eye on your blood pressure. Your NHS 60 years anniversary poem is touching to all working here in ICU. Thank you. Please send it to Boris Johnson. I really hope you recover well. Best of luck. Kajal Doshi, physio and ICU helper. And just think about that. That's a physio. So physios are not trained nurses. They're wonderfully trained people. As you'll hear later, they taught me how to walk. So they're coming into the ICU ward. And bear in mind, they're coming into what the Professor Hugh Montgomery, the prof in charge of my ward, called carnage. So these are young people who aren't used to handling or seeing dead bodies, are seeing them all the time coming through. And again, Hugh Montgomery's words, he might be having a chat with somebody who's just coming round from the coma. He goes out, grab a bite to eat or something, comes back 15 minutes later, the guy had gone. And this was happening at an extraordinary rate in ICU wards all over the country in March and April and May. And then Emma would write home sorry, not write home. She's at home. Wishful thinking. She would write to everybody in the family. In Yiddish, that's called the mishpucha. That means the sort of wider family. And here she is writing on the 2nd of May. Hi all. Mick, that's what she calls me, is experiencing delirium at the moment, and this is making him quite agitated, hallucinating and moving his arms and legs around. So you can imagine I'm lying in bed and, as she says, writhing about, waving around. And it's very worrying for the nurses because, especially if you're, say, a big bloke like me. The doctor asked me for some music last evening, and apparently some Django Reinhardt seemed to soothe him a bit. Elsie and I made a playlist for him this morning, which is now taped up on the wall by his bed, and the staff have already played him some of the tracks. Love to all, Emma. Now, when I read that, I have no memory of that at all, all right? So I'm hallucinating, delirium, waving my arms and legs about, being soothed by Django Reinhardt, and no memory of it at all. So a coma, just when people tragically with accidents get knocked unconscious, this stuff they put into you to knock you out, I don't know what it is, I haven't asked them. There's no way back into it, at least for me, there isn't. And again, then, so at the end of this phase, on the 22nd of May, so what's the date today? 24th. So this is virtually a 1-year anniversary today. Here's Emma writing to their family. I'm very happy to say that Michael is moving out of ICU tonight and will be going to Merrick Ward. He has no tracheostomy tube, no oxygen support apart from a nebulizer. He's talking, still confused, delirium at times. And he's trying to piece it all together, obviously, but slowly becoming more Mick-like. I don't know what that means, actually. She does anyway. I'm going to the hospital in a bit to deliver him some comfy bed clothes, a soft blanket, his own toiletries, etc., for when he's able to move a bit more and get out of bed. I couldn't. He will have been in hospital 8 weeks tomorrow and has spent 47 days in ICU. Looking forward to a glass of wine later. Love to all, Emma, kiss. So if you're on your back for 47 days like that, what happens to you is you become deconditioned. So obviously the opposite of conditioning, which basically means that you turn into a blob apart from your skeleton. So just think of all your muscles not really working, and everything that, people talk about, trainers and so on, about get your core into shape. There was no core, it was just jelly. So I take up the writing now. A doctor asks me whether I've had hallucinations or nightmares or terrifying delirium. I say no. She says they're getting reports that people who've been in intensive care are experiencing this and they're troubled by it. Are you? No. She says, we gave you a lot of mind-changing drugs. So we wouldn't be surprised if you said you were suffering from this. Were you upset or agitated by anything like this? I said that I dream the Christmas Carol and write a new version in my head, then become distressed that I can't write it down. She says. I also keep dreaming of a German Christmas party. It's always the same part. I've never been to a German Christmas party, but I'm sitting outside at night in a garden wrapped in blankets, and I know that I can't move my legs. My legs won't move. Someone explains that they throw purple berries into the air. They do it. They throw the berries in the air and the berries burst with a flash. Pew! Like little stars. And everyone cheers. Yeah! They tell me the word for the purple berries is Wasbeeren. Again, the berries burst in the night sky and everyone cheers. Hooray! Pew! I have that dream again and again, I say, again and again. She says. Nothing terrifying? I am disturbed by another dream. I imagine that just before I got ill, I came across a statement, a kind of manifesto from a German farmer. It was a reply to the hate coming from neo-Nazis in his neighborhood. He comes towards me wearing a stone-washed bib and brace. He stands alongside his 1950s tractor with his family around him. His manifesto tells how we can only go on if we love each other. We have to find many different kinds of love, he says. Love for lovers, love for our children, love for our colleagues, love even for people we don't know. If we don't, we'll destroy ourselves. What makes me sad about this dream is that I keep getting to the point where I'm thinking, where is this manifesto? Who is the farmer? I feel sure he gave it to me before I got ill. How did I get to meet him and his family? Where was it? And then it goes. It's not nightmarish, more a matter of regret that I've lost track of something. A nurse tells me every day that Emma has rung and that they're telling her everything. I think of the space between here and home where Emma is. It's only a few streets, but it's a gulf. In that world, I used to get up and make myself breakfast. I'd sit down with Emma and plan what I would do over the next few months. Here, I wait for a meal. And I'm asked if I've opened my bowels. Was it a big one, a medium one, or a small one? I'm ticked off if I lie too far from the centre of the bed. A nurse walks past singing, "No woman, no woman, no cry." Yes, no woman, no cry. One day they bring a hydraulic hoist to my bed, put me in a sling, lift me into a chair and wheel me to a window on the 4th floor that looks out over London. Emma is there with the children. We sit with our masks on. I have a blanket. We're together. I feel bad that I'm so helpless, that I can't move. I start to feel weak and dizzy. They wheel me away and I can't look round to wave goodbye. A doctor stands by my bed and says that I have 3 blood clots in my lungs. I picture 3 reddish-brown scabs stuck in the passageways of my lungs, nestling in the alveoli, little bubble-like cul-de-sacs that I drew for my biology exam when I was 16. She says blood clots are always a worry because they can get into the bloodstream and cause heart attacks and strokes. I see the scabs heading downstream in my veins, getting stuck in the heart I dissected for biology, or pushing into my brain and killing off a chunk of that cauliflower-looking thing. How worried should I be, I say. You'll probably digest them, she says. I remember picking scabs off my knee on camping holidays and eating them. I must have digested them. Yes. Keep an eye on the time. I think probably, do you want me to stop now, Adam?
I'm happy for you to go on for another 2 or 3 minutes and then we can go into the question.
Okay. All right. So as you can see, I'm waking up. Yep, I'll find you just 1 or 2 more as we carry on. So doctors are talking to me. I'm understanding what they're saying. I'm getting to know myself and thinking. There was an advert in underground stations when I was a child. 2 small children who we see from behind, walking along a long, empty road, holding hands, dark trees on either side. The ad line was, "Children's shoes have far to go." I used to feel sad for the children, so alone, so far from home. I see the ad again and again. You sent in giant yellow sultanas. You know me. Every morning I drop them into the porridge that the nurses bring us. As I sip, I discover the sultanas basking in the deep, swelling in the hot milk, and I nibble them, one by one, with my front teeth, pushing my tongue against the wrinkles and flesh. So yeah, I will stop there then, just to tell you that after I'd been on the ward, as they say, I was sent to a rehabilitation hospital in St Pancras, where they taught me how to stand up, how to sit in a wheelchair, then how to walk with a Zimmer frame. And at each stage, I thought that was the end. I thought, oh, right, I'm a Zimmer person, am I? And I thought, well, that's quite honourable. Robert Zimmerman, you may have heard of him. He's just had his 80th birthday, otherwise known as Bob Dylan. I thought, well, I'll be Zimmerman. And then I thought, wheelchair. I rang up Adi Aditpan, not rang him up, texted him, to see if he'd got any hints about how to get around the ward. He was very helpful. And then they said that this wasn't good enough. I had to have a stick. So they gave me a stick, and I called it Sticky McStick Stick. Not very original, I know. Sorry about that. And I walked around in the hospital with the stick. I felt very proud and said, "I'll be coming home with a stick, Emma." And she said, "No, you're not." She said, "You're coming back. You're not with no wheelchair, no stick, no Zimmer." And so that was a bit of a challenge, really. So I had 3 weeks to learn how to walk, you see. So I went to the rehab and I couldn't stand up. And by the end, those incredible physiotherapists and occupational therapists taught me how to walk for, as I say in the book, the third time in my life. First time was probably the way most of you learned how to walk when you were somewhere between the ages of 0 and 3. And the second time was when I was knocked down in the road when I was 17 and was in hospital for about 3 months then. So I had to learn how to walk after that. So I've probably, I don't doubt whether it's a record, but I'm quite proud. I've learned how to walk 3 times in my life.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. I really enjoyed listening to that, and I'm sure the whole of the audience did. We'll start with my questions. Just a reminder to the whole of the audience, you can ask your questions through the Q&A function. Just remember to put your name and your college into there as well. And I'll ask those questions in the last 15 minutes. So without further ado, I'll crack on with my questions. Let's start off by talking a bit about your upbringing and early career, Michael. Your father was a professor of English and your mother worked for the BBC. Did their professions in any way influence your future choice of occupation?
Right. You've got to rack back a bit from that, because all that eminence for my parents happened long after I left home and they were into their 50s and 60s. So as I was growing up, they were both teachers, classroom teachers. So just think about that for a moment. You're a kid, you come home from school and your mum or dad, either or both, say, "What did you do in school today?" And, quite a few parents, they say that and then walk away from their kids. They go, "What did you do in school today?" And the kid goes, "Well, I was," and I go, "All right, good. What do you want for tea?" That sort of thing. But my parents used to say, "What did you do in school today?" And they meant it. So you then had you facing basically a kind of quite stern test, stern examination. So they would say, "What did you do in school today?" And I might go, "Well, some history." History? That's really interesting. What sort of history? And I go, it's just sort of history stuff. Yeah, but what kind of history? So anyway, that's what it was like. They were both classroom teachers all the time when I was growing up. And then just as I was going to college and so on, my dad got he'd already just started at college, actually, teaching. He trained teachers, and then mum started doing that as well. So, but through childhood, it was great fun going to their schools. So insofar as it had an influence on my career, well, when they were growing up, I thought, first of all, I'd be a farmer. That didn't happen. It's because we camped on farms. So I rather liked milking cows by hand. I was born a long time ago. So we used to milk by hand. So I was very proud of that. And then I decided I'd be an actor. And that lasted all the way till I came to the august institution where you're sitting. I was still desperately keen to become an actor. But the problem was that every time I did a serious part, people laughed. And every time I did a sort of comical part, people said, "That's not very funny." So that was a bit tricky. So I took up writing.
Yeah. To then move on to the next question. Could you tell us a bit about the ways in which your Jewish heritage influenced your childhood and your sort of future outlook on life?
I think there's several strands to that. First of all, both my parents, I became aware one way or another that though they were not religious, that they used this language that didn't match up to the languages of the people around me. So this language is Yiddish, Eastern European, Germanic-based language. It's like a German dialect, but that's not really right. It's a Germanic language with plenty of Hebrew and Slavonic mixed in with it. And so they would say things. So like my mother maybe would say, "Look, grab the schmutter." And I'd know what that was. She would hand me what other people call a tea towel, you see, and then I would dry up with it. And then I'd go to school the next day and I'd say, "Hey, when you have to do the drying up, you have to do the chores, and you've got the schmutter." And they go, "Sorry?" I say, "A schmutter." They say, "What's a schmutter?" I'd say, "Well, the thing you dry up with." They went, "No, it's a tea towel." So I go home and I say, Mum, the folks at school, they say it's called a tea towel. Mum would say, "No, it's a schmutter." So anyway, I soon learned, or she'd burst into my room and say, "This place is a Mishnah. I'd say, "What's a Mishnah?" And she said, "Well, this room," and then walk out. So these were the kind of explanations I had. So I sort of learned that this was going on. At the same time, my father was a great teller of Jewish jokes, which have got a particular kind of way of going on, like this mother gives her son 2 shirts. He gets up in the morning, he comes down with one of the shirts, and his mother looks at him and says, "So, the other shirt you don't like?" Anyway, there we are. So there were lots of these that my dad told. And then he also told me about anti-Semitism, and he would warn me about what that is. And I remember him coming back from college one day, and he said that he was sitting at the table at the teaching college, and a man was talking about somebody and described him as a nasty little Jew. And my dad said that he leant across to him and said, "Are there any other kinds of little Jew that you know?" And apparently the bloke just froze. And this is burnt in my head that way of talking, and then that my dad was that quick, at least, I hope he was that quick, and it wasn't esprit d'escalier, I don't know. But anyway, that he said that. And so there's that, but that's just one strand, if you like. Obviously, there's things like food and so on. My dad was always lamenting foods that we didn't have. He'd go, "Oh, my bubba's cholent." Bubba is grandmother, and cholent is a dish that we never had. So we'd sit there and go, "What's he on about? Oh, my bubba's cholent. Oh, you can't believe it." And my mum would suddenly lose her rag, you see, and she'd go, "I'm not standing by the cooker for 24 hours making cholent. Maybe your bubba did, but she spoilt you. And I'm, yeah, but what is cholent, Mum?" We never found out. It's all right, I found out since, but anyway. But leave that to one side. My parents had lived through the East End of London in the 30s and had taken part in the struggles of Jews and others against the fascists in the East End. And I think their first date actually was Cable Street. This is the Battle of Cable Street, 19 October the 4th, 1936. It's ingrained in my mind, but my mind is fuzzy. I can't even remember the name of Tom Cruise these days. That's the kind of terrible effect of long COVID. You can't remember the name of Tom Cruise. Anyway, so October the 4th, 1936, I think, was their first date with the Battle of Cable Street, fighting Mosley's mob. Well, they weren't actually Mosley's mob, but anyway, never mind. We won't go into the details there. And so they talked about that. They talked about this time. But then there is another strand, which I'm trying to get to, which is, if you like, I suppose you could call it a sense of story. In Hebrew, it's known as the Agatic Tradition. That's to say that in order to convey philosophy and in order to convey the rights and wrongs of things, that you express it through narrative. And looking back on it, my parents, I think, without necessarily putting that name to it, were fervent believers in that. They anecdotized, they wrote stories, they wrote poems, and they believed in the power of story central to it. In fact, in my dad's last years, he went around schools telling stories. So I suppose that was very powerful, and their attitudes to justice and fairness came largely from their backgrounds. Whether I would necessarily say that was Jewish or not, but maybe it was inflected with the Jewishness of their forebears who had come out of Eastern Europe from the pogroms, from the times when the Tsarist police and security forces were beating Jews, victimizing them, and so on.
Thank you, Michael. That was really, really insightful. And I, for one, am very happy that you in later life found out what your Nana's favourite dish was as well. But yeah, as the next question, could you tell us a bit about your time at Oxford, in particular at Wadham College, and what that was like?
Okay, so I arrived in Oxford with a secret plan in my head. I'd done 1 year as a medical student at Middlesex Hospital Medical School. This was my father's dearest, dearest hope, my mother's slightly less so, but my father's, that I would become a doctor and look after him when he got ill. This was his dream. And so I did find that I was fulfilling his dream as opposed to mine, which is always a bit of a mistake. You're laughing, Adam, maybe this applies to you, but anyway, don't go there, it's all right. So, and I won't ask you. And so my plan was that somehow or other I'd be able to wriggle out of doing medicine, because my brother, who'd been at Wadham before me, had said that people changed course fairly easily in Oxford. And so I kind of came up with a ruse that that's what I would do. So I struggled willfully through doing medicine at Oxford for the first year, which was first year of a degree in physiology in those days. So I was up at the medical places, anatomy with cadavers and all that, and biochemistry and so on. And I struggled with it, and then finally said, I can't do it. And the way to deal with this was to go and see the warden of Wadham, who at the time was a very well-known and eccentric figure called Sir Maurice Bowrer, who had a very, very strange way of talking. So if I tell you the very last thing he said to me that I heard him say was, we passed each other in the quadrangle, and he looked at me and he said, working. So you can get the idea of the way he spoke. And I went, not really, Sir Maurice. And he went, thinking. And I went, well, probably not that either. He said, I completely lost the capacity to do either. So there we are. And then he walked on. So it gives you an idea of how he spoke. Supposedly, he once said, when he saw a couple who got married, he said, beautiful couple, slept with both of them. That's another one of his favorite quotes. Anyway, there's a whole book full of them. And he was like that. I mean, I could tell you another 10, but I won't do that. So anyway, he did enable me to change course. He arranged a meeting with me and my father. In those days, we used to go around with our fathers and mothers and so on. And my dad had prepared a whole speech. And I sat down with my father and Sir Maurice. And he said, that's how you would begin a conversation with a student. And I said, I'd like to change course. And he said, from what to what? And I said, as if he didn't know, you see. And I said, from medicine to English. Can you write a sentence? I said, yes. He said, good. What does your father think of it? And my dad had prepared this speech because he's from the University of London, thought it'd be all formal. And he went, well, he said, good. Convince your father, convince anybody. You haven't got your money, £50, so to do goodbye. And that was the end of it. So I changed course, started doing English with the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tutor, Ian Donaldson, the late Ian Donaldson. And I had a wonderful time. And I also, some English students will know of F.W. Bateson, the Wordsworth scholar. And I worked with him as well. And someone else called W. Robson. And I did a lot of acting, a lot of writing, a lot of journalism. And it was also a time of revolting students. And I was a revolting student, very. And so it was 1968 into 69. And so after 5 years in higher education, I came out of university with a degree at the age of 23. Well, that's a sort of truncated version. I wrote about it all in a book called So They Call You Pisher. So if anyone wants to sort of catch up on any of that, that's a blatant plug, of course, but it is a memoir called So They Call You Pisher.
That's amazing. I'll definitely be sure to check that out. That was very, very interesting and very entertaining. Cool. Let's now talk a bit about your career and time as Children's Laureate. You were awarded the position of Children's Laureate in June 2007. Can you tell us a bit about what this moment was like for you, the moment of finding out that you were awarded Children's Laureate?
Yeah, at the very moment, I was on a train, actually, and I got a call from the chair of judges, and she said, well done. I said, sorry, who is this? And she said her name. It's private, so I won't say. She said her name. And I said, sorry, what are you telling me? Well, you've got it. And I wasn't playing stupid. I said, got what? And she said, well, what do you think? And the train was running, and I get a bit flustered sometimes, as my son always tells me. Don't get flustered, Dad. Composure. So anyway, I said, right, sorry, can you say? I said, sorry, what is it? You're the Children's Laureate. Am I? Anyway, so that was how I heard about it, not very kind of conclusive at the time. And it was an immense, incredible privilege. I mean, this is your peers in the profession saying, we would like you to represent children's books for 2 years. So, it's an award, but it's a job as well. You get paid. And every laureate defines the laureateship for themselves. So Quentin did it, Quentin Blake, sorry, I'm being over familiar. Quentin Blake, Sir Quentin Blake, I should say. He interpreted it as being focused on art. Others have interpreted, Chris Riddell, who's done the pictures for many different kinds of love. He did a lot of work around drawing and so on. Each person has interpreted it in different ways. Jacqueline Wilson's done it, and Fine, Michael Morpurgo, who founded the whole idea. And I took it to do several things to do with poetry, of course. So I did a lot of work on the poetry, did a tour all around the country collecting poets, and then turned it into a book called The A to Z of Poetry, of all the sort of performance poets doing performance poems in schools and so on. And then also we had an exhibition at the British Library of illustrations of poets, which was lovely. And then also I thought, well, there's lots of lovely awards for children's books, very serious ones, the Carnegie, the Kate Greenaway, and others. And I thought, well, how about an award for the funniest book of the year? So I created a funny prize, which started off being the Roald Dahl Funny Prize. Then it had a little time of abeyance, and it's now the Laugh Out Loud Awards, otherwise known as the Lollies. I'm not in charge of it or anything. It comes from Scholastic Books, and I'm the chair of judges. And it's wonderful. We have the funniest book of the year, books for different age groups, and it's wonderful. That's a bit of legacy there. So that's nice. So that's what I did.
That's great. So whilst at the BBC, you also presented a series on television called Walrus: Write and Learn, Read, Understand, Speak. When we talk about the specific image of education that you attempted to sort of project to children at the time, you say you tried to do lots of things as Children's Laureate. What kind of brand would you say that was within, if you had to sort of couch it in something specific?
Well, I believe in education that we waste a lot of time testing children. And more than that, I think testing too much narrows the curriculum down, because teachers, of course, want to do best by the children. And so no criticism of teachers at all is, of course, they have to teach to the tests. So children now are being tested, just introducing what they call baseline testing at 4. They have the phonics test at the end of year 1, I think it is. Then they have a Key Stage 2 SATs, then they have Key Stage 1 SATs, then Key Stage 2 SATs. So primary schools are, if you like, sort of suspended between this testing. And then the GCSEs, again, in secondary schools, the first 3 years are fairly free of it. But then the next 2 years, again, it just becomes like a sort of GCSE panic zone. So you don't need GCSEs anymore. And this is not a rabid left-wing thing that I've come up with. The person who's most keen on it at the moment is Sir Kenneth Baker, who was the Conservative Secretary of State for Education in 1988. So, this is an idea that plenty of people, indeed within private education as well as state education, are realizing that it's an obstacle, testing kids with a once and for all high stakes test with GCSEs. My own youngest son is doing them now. So I think, it's a great penalizing thing, and there are other possibilities. So I have some catchwords, some touchstones, if you like, as to what education needs to include: investigation, invention, interpretation, as a minimum, cooperation, and that we keep thinking of education almost way back to medieval times, that the teacher is full of knowledge, the child has no knowledge, and it's just the job. It's called the jug and mug theory of education. The jug pours into the empty mug. No child, no student is an empty mug. All human beings are interpreters and reflectors, and that we need to find forms of education. One version of it is to call it dialogic learning, in which education is a form of dialogue, not only. That's not to say there's no instruction at all. So, people want to misconstrue or misinterpret what I'm saying, but that we need to put this dialogical elements in it. We need to put investigation. We need to have scope for invention. In fact, we're moving away from invention. The government want to cut university arts courses by 50%, which will have a knock-on effect into secondary schools, which will have a knock-on effect into primary schools. The arts are fundamental for all of us. They're another way to interpret, investigate in the world, and indeed to invent things and to interpret the world. If you think in the past, and even now, we rate very highly the ability of one art form to interpret another. When we go into great stately homes and into galleries, what do we see? We see paintings that are interpretations of classical scenes from Homer or other aspects of Greek mythology, and this was regarded as the highest art form of all. And yet, if we say in schools, the highest form of interpretation is the essay. Well, the essay suits some people, and that's great. It suited me when I was at school, but it doesn't suit everybody. And there are other ways of using our total intelligence, whatever that is, to interpret the world through art forms, whether that's drumming, singing, dancing, writing poems, which obviously I'm keen on. So there we are. You asked me for my kind of world picture of what education might be, and I'm afraid I gave you an answer.
No, thank you very much. It was a fantastic answer, Michael. You in there mentioned something to do with Tory politics and kind of that aspect quite early on in your answer, in terms of it being a priority around, or testing being a priority for them in particular. My question to you then is, how did your left-wing politics affect your time at the BBC? What kind of impact did that have on your day-to-day, but also your view of the BBC as well?
Right. So I went into the BBC in '69. I'd already been vetted. Someone had come to Oxford to check out whether I was suitable or not. That's what my tutor told me, that I'd been vetted. And then a committee then approved my entry into the BBC. And I told them about having been a revolting student. I got the impression they already knew. And so I had actually made a vow that I would leave politics at the door. I was very interested in children's programming. The first part of my employment at the BBC in '69 to '70 was in radio drama. And that was fun and interesting. And we talked about plays and what plays could go on radio and so on, Radio 3 and Radio 4. And then I was over at a program called Play School for under fives. And I absolutely adored that. It was one of the best years of my life, writing and directing Play School. And I thought this was lovely. And then I went off to schools telly, analogous, if you like, and worked on a TV series. And in fact, I'm now going to boast, I am partly to blame, or if whatever, to praise for the fact that I introduced Sandra Kerr and John Faulkner to Oliver Postgate, and thereby is the music of Bum 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 Bagpuss. So though I not in any way responsible for the music, I did cause the introduction to happen, because I was writing this Teach to Read series called Sam on Boff's Island. And it was perhaps the first time that Miriam Margolyes and Tony Robinson appeared in a TV series together. So this is 1972, 73. And then rather strangely, I discovered that I was applying for jobs off the back of this traineeship, and I wasn't getting them. But when I had the interview, they told me I had got them. So I applied for continuing education, further education, Open University, that sort of thing. And then, so they then paid me to sit at home. So I sat at home for 3 or 4 months, not working, not getting jobs. And then I was invited in and offered an ex gratia payment. First time I've met that Latin phrase. So I was offered an ex gratia payment of, I think, 400 quid, and said, well done, you're going freelance. And I thought, yeah, look at me. Freelance. It took me about the length of time it takes to get from the BBC building to Oxford Circus Station to realize they'd just sacked me. But in between, I felt very proud. I was now freelance. And then 10 years later, I found that in actual fact, MI5 had decided that I shouldn't be employed by the BBC. It's a long story. In 1984, it came out in the Observer, Sunday Observer. You can read about it. It's all about Christmas trees on our files and so on. It's very kind of mixture between what's quite Orwellian, or like sort of old movies by the Bolting brothers that may not mean much to you. Ealing comedies of chaps sitting around going, oh, we're not really too happy with this chap, are we? No, what should we do with him? I don't know, slap a Christmas tree on his old file. Open filing cabinet, close filing cabinet, open filing cabinet, close filing cabinet. So anyway, that's what happened. And then since I was sacked, I probably worked for the BBC more than I did at the time. So it's rather peculiar. But then I will defend the BBC under most circumstances, not for its individual deeds, but for its total institution. So this is what I've just said is not a slagging off the Beeb. I have done, it has provided me with both intellectual stimulus, and I hope I've been able to fulfill what I've tried to do, which is public service broadcasting, edutainment, infotainment, whatever you want to call it, for most of that time around literature and language, which I'm absolutely privileged to be somebody who does that. And I will thank the BBC till the day I die.
Fantastic. We've got probably about 5 questions left, so I'm going to nudge you along in your responses as we go. The next question that I've got, so I've got about 3 questions myself, and then we've got about 2 or 3 audience questions, but we were slightly late starting, so we can go on for a tiny bit longer after, if that's right with you as well. My next question is, as an active campaigner for the Palestine cause, what are your thoughts on the current situation?
Right, I'm not active.
As a previously active, rather.
Well, even so, quite inactive. I'm not going to kind of claim credit for something. So, plenty of us in life, we kind of, something comes past us on our desk or through the computer and so on. So, but I'm not denying that I've supported it, and I support that, as I hope I've supported movements for Indigenous peoples, for oppressed peoples, or people experiencing racism. in all sorts of places in the world, or indeed at home. So, sometimes my emphasis has been, insofar as it is, I've been approached by people involved, say, in the Windrush campaign, because I've known people that's affected. So, that's sort of risen to the, if you like. And also, I'm a very, very busy bloke. So sometimes politics happens in a little chunk and it doesn't happen again for months. So anyway, I think what's happened in the Middle East and in as a whole and in Israel is a tragedy. Israel-Palestine, that it's been a tragedy for a variety of reasons, and we haven't got time to talk about it. And ultimately, it's a tragedy for all concerned. It can only be resolved ultimately by some form of agreement, and that's expressing a truism. But I know that people behind the scenes are grappling with various solutions, whether it's one state, two state, or indeed, as I saw in The Guardian last week, federated state of some sort. After all, the United Kingdom, though we call it the United Kingdom, is a form of federated state. There are many forms of federated states. And, I hope that some solution that satisfies enough of the parties concerned will be arrived at, but it does require all parties to recognize each other's right to be there. And so that of itself, of course, is another problem. And I have no links to Israel. Yes, I'm Jewish, but all my links are with Poland, France, and America. So I see myself, all my family spread out during the Holocaust. In fact, Poland, all gone, France, all gone. It's only the British and American sides of my family who survived. And, I'm fully aware of that. But it is European based. So when people say, as you've just done, which is quite legitimate, I understand it, what do you think of Israel? I kind of have to do a sort of little click and sort of think, well, I've never been there. I don't know about it. Maybe sometimes I've opened my mouth too soon about that. But anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So that's the issue. And it has to be worked out by the people on the ground. So if a federated solution works, if whatever is decided, but at the moment, what's going on is no solution. And it's gone on for so long, it's become a kind of de facto solution that is unsatisfactory. So it's not a solution. I mean, the occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, is just not a solution. It is so that, I mean, and it's no use pretending it is, and it's no use pretending there's a peace process, because there isn't. So there has to be something else.
Of course. Thank you very much for that response. A last question from me. I'll skip one of my questions, but I'll go on to one last question from me and then two audience questions. In the opening of your book that you gave us some excerpts from at the start, Many Different Kinds of Love, you state that it's intended for everyone, not just children. What made you decide to direct it towards a much wider audience than you typically might be seen to have done?
There's a get out here. I'm going to say I didn't decide. Okay, I'll explain that. Is that when I came home, I now realize I was in a bit of a state. I couldn't really remember things. People were telling me stuff, and then I'd think I understood it, and then I didn't. And my mind was shot. And physically, I was hopeless. I could only walk about maybe 30 or 40 yards, or maybe walk for about 5 minutes if I was lucky, holding on to things. So I was in quite a pickle, but my head was full of thoughts. And when my head is full of thoughts, what I do is write. And I don't actually ask the question, am I writing for a child or an adult? I just sort of start writing. And I wanted to get down on paper how I felt, what I could see, what I remembered, what I didn't remember, what Emma had said, what this doctor had said, what they were making me do today, how many pills I was taking. So I can now see I was getting my head straight, because as they said, they had given me mind-changing drugs. I mean, in its own way, it's analogous to someone coming off drug addiction, because in a way I'd been addicted for 3 months.
Yeah.
And so I was coming off, I'm not saying it's cold turkey or anything, but I was coming off drugs. And people have said some people really, really suffer, and they go on suffering for maybe a year or more with flashbacks and hallucinations, paranoia, that so-and-so was trying to get me and so on. And it's all understandable given the amount of stuff they put into us. And so I wrote and I scribbled, and then I sent the writings off to people who I know, agents and so on, and they went, "Oh, this is great." And then bit by bit, it sort of gathered with the nurses' letters and Emma's tweets to the family. It sort of gathered momentum. And when people say this is lovely and we like it and we're going to make a book out of it, I'm always very thrilled. So I've tapped your question in a way, but I've tried to explain where I came from instead.
Yeah. So yes, but it occurred indirectly.
Yes, that's right. Or without thought, in a way. I will get down on paper that moment when the doctor said 50-50, and I'll do it as plainly. Sometimes I find that to be authentic, I have to be quite plain and not crisp, and don't over elaborate. And so just to get it right, as I say to myself. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Fantastic. We'll move on to the last two questions from the audience. The first audience question comes from Katie Rennie from Oriel College. Katie asks, do you have any tips for aspiring writers of children's literature?
Yeah, there are two tips, basically. You must immerse yourself in children's books. And I guess you've already done that for many years in your life anyway. But to go on doing it, that's the sort of odd thing, if you like, because by and large, when we get sort of 15 and 16 and our teachers standing over us saying, read Inspector Calls, Macbeth, and I don't know, Tess of the D'Urbervilles or something, we do. And it's unlikely that we're going to go back and read Roald Dahl or something like that. But if you've decided that you'd like to write for children, think what genre you would like to write in, roughly, without tying your hands, and read in that genre so you get the feel of what it's like. And that's like that with any art form, that you find others who do it, and then you think, right. Oh, I get that motif. I get that trope. I get the way that ends. Oh, yeah. And you start seeing these patterns. Oh, right. That's the quest, is it? Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, there's the red herring. Oh, right. Yeah. And that's not going to happen. And you start spotting these. Yeah. And that's great. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I'd say is, if you, just in case you forget, remember that you were a child once, and try and remember that child. How did that child feel when, I'm just going to say horrible things now, when your granddad died? What did that child feel when you lost your teddy? I know it sounds crazy, but you think of one of the loveliest books for children, Shirley Hughes' Dogger. She this is a grown woman is remembering the feeling of losing a soft toy, a teddy bear or something like that. That's big stuff for a 4-year-old. And the 4-year-old is a human being. It's not that they're less of a human being. And that's why that's a profound book. Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak is thinking back to when he was a child and he got angry, and has created a myth around the idea of childhood anger. But that's because he's remembered, he didn't have children of his own, he's remembered that feeling of being raging against his mother. So go back to those childhood moments, make a note of them, do a sort of backwards diary where you write down the things that happened to you as a child and what you thought and felt. And you may or may not use it, but that will give you plot tropes, give you little ideas of what it felt like when you were alone or lost. So do that as well. And if by chance you've got nephews, nieces, or beginning to have children, probably not yet at Oxford, then read books to them and see what it is, tickles them, makes them sad, says, I don't like that book. So, or maybe work in a play group, or maybe offer to be a TA or something, or work in a youth camp in the summer holidays. And things will happen around you that will be funny and awful, and they will become adventures that you can use.
Fabulous. And the last question is from Daniel Dipper, the Union's Disabilities Officer from Magdalen College, who asks, what has been the funniest experience of your career to date?
It does.
Make it a good one.
Oh dear, God, it's the funniest thing of all in my career.
Or one of the funniest.
Oh dear. Oh, you've put me on a spot now. Funniest thing of all. I suppose it's what children or teenagers say to me when they meet me. One kid said, what did he say? He saw me in the street and he said, you look just like Michael Rosen. And I said, yeah, I am. And he said, yeah, I thought so. Sorry, I've muffed it. He said, I thought you looked like Michael Rosen. Anyway, never mind. Another one, here is another one. I do the poems in schools. And sometimes the questions come, and I said, down behind the dustbin, I met a dog called Jim. He didn't know me, and I didn't know him. And this kid shouted out, well, how do you know his name was Jim then? That was quite good, I thought. And now we are, one more. So here we are. So I'm got to the end of my show, which is about 1 hour in the school, and I get to the end, And I said, any questions? And the kids put their hands up, you see, and there was a little boy on the front row, and he put his hand up and he said, I said, yeah, what's your question? And he said, do you know my dad's name? And I said, no. And he said, it's Patrick. I said, thanks very much. Anyway, so there we are. There was a lovely little moment. So I'm trying to think of that one about you. You look like Michael Rosen. Anyway, never mind. I know it tickled me at the time. Anyway, there you go. There's 2 or 3 very nice moments from visits to schools, if you talk about my career as such. I never see it as a career, by the way. It just seems one thing happens after another, after another. Sometimes they don't happen, and then you have to have a little rest, and then another thing happens. Some people plan their careers. Good luck to them. I've never done that.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was incredibly insightful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure the entirety of the audience found that really rewarding and rib tickling. I wish you a phenomenal rest of the evening, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book as well. Thanks for coming, everybody. All the best.
Thank you.